G'day, this is Chris Savage from RL Ministries in Australia, welcoming you to this session of the book of Isaiah. I pray that it will be of benefit to you and help you in your Christian growth. This study has been taken from a commentary by Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, the founder of RL Ministries. Thank you for coming along. So we're into session 32. Thanks for coming along. We're going to hopefully get from chapter 60, verse 1 down to chapter 61, verse 11. Just quickly, last session, we saw that sin had totally corrupted the Jewish people, and these sins were not done in ignorance, but were carefully planned out, and the people's sins became the foundation for their own self-destruction. And we see Israel's confession; they confessed their sins, even though they were, they thought they were very, very faithful in their ritual temple worship and stuff. But as God says, wrong motivation, didn't work. And so her sins have grown in intensity against God. However, while this has been going on for a long time, it's not going to be a permanent condition, because we know that. And also we see from last session, we see that now Israel is confessing the truth of the charges against her, that she is a sinful nation and she has turned her back on God. Now, we know that preceding the second coming, the establishment of the king and the establishment of the kingdom, there must be a national confession which will lead to the regeneration of Israel. Now, as Israel confesses her national sin, she recognizes the dire straits that she's in, spiritually blind, and she compares herself to someone who's just spiritual dead, which is what she was. She's totally separated from her God. And because of her condition, there was no salvation. And the sins against Jehovah, had to do with turning away from him and denying him and all those things. But we see God's intervention over the condition, because there are some within the nation who have turned back to Jehovah. They were faithful. They have never left, and they're the remnant in Israel. And he sees that the remnant are being persecuted by the non-believing Jews. The remnant were become prey, and so he says, "Okay, I've got to intervene here. I've got to send somebody to rescue the remnant." And so, we see God intervenes, and what does he do? He sends the arm of Jehovah. God's own arm will bring salvation and righteousness to the nation of Israel. Now, on the basis of divine justice and following Israel's confession and regeneration, Jehovah must now act on behalf of the remnant. So the servant, he prepares for war, puts on his armor, prepares for war, and he goes to war. In the course of the war, God's arm, the arm of Jehovah, which we know is the Messiah, will fight on behalf of Israel. The wicked will be punished, and he'll carry out a severe judgment against on Israel's behalf against others. Now, we also saw that there's one specific adversary, and that was the one we call the Antichrist. We saw that last session. He'll come against Israel with a military invasion, and then we see that the Spirit of Jehovah will lift up a standard against him, and that standard we saw was a believing nation. Now, at the end of the tribulation, which we looked at briefly last time, this guy, Antichrist, is going to invade what has become known as an invasion called the Campaign of Armageddon. He's going to get an army together. He's going to go against the Jews in hiding in a place called Bozrah. And in the last 3 days of the tribulation period, we see that the Jewish people who have survived that long, they'll confess their sin, because they'll come to the realization that Yeshua was the Messiah. And they'll confess their sins for the 2 of the last 3 days of the tribulation. And on the last day of the tribulation, they will plead for Messiah's return. And he does return. He dispenses with the armies outside of Bozrah. Now, when Israel's national regeneration comes after their national confession, then comes the Redeemer. And the Redeemer is God as a man of war. Messiah will come to redeem Zion or Jerusalem. He'll also redeem those who have turned away from sin. And as a result of this is a quick overview. Messiah will establish the new covenant with Israel. And with that new covenant, every Jew born in the kingdom will come to faith in Messiah Jesus. No Jew will have to tell the other one to know God, because they'll all know God. Okay, let's move on to this session. Now, this is just to show you where we are. We're still in this session here where she's received of Jehovah's hand double for all her sins, going down from 58:1 to 66:24. Now, Israel in the Messianic kingdom. This is chapter 60, verses 1 to 22. Now, just we're into chapter 60 here. Now, on Shabbat and holy day mornings, the Torah, first 5 books of the Hebrew scriptures, the reading cycle proceeds from Genesis through Deuteronomy. It covers all 5 books of Moses. A selection of chapters from the Nevi'im, which is the prophets, is read in synagogue after the Torah reading. So you have the Torah reading, then you have just a passage out of one of the prophets. And the portion is known as the Haftarah. Isaiah 60 is one such passage that they read. And it's in readiness in the synagogue for Kitavu, the 50th weekly parashah, Torah portion in the annual cycle of Torah reading. I'm just telling you this because we're looking at chapter 60. Chapters 58 to 59 dealt with Israel's sins and Israel's confession and Israel's national regeneration. This will bring about the coming of the Redeemer to Zion and the dispensing of the invading armies of the world as a result. When we spoke about Romans 11, just briefly. We noted that Paul used Isaiah 59, verses 20 to 21, to prove that all Israel will be saved. There'll be a national regeneration of Israel, and he uses those verses from Isaiah 59, 20 to 21. Okay, now, Israel and the Messianic kingdom again. Just want to briefly just share with you here, following the regeneration and of Israel in the second coming will be the establishment of the kingdom. Now, that's going to be the topic in the next 22 verses. But Isaiah says quite a bit about the Shekinah glory. The Shekinah glory. What's the Shekinah glory? Well, the greatest manifestation of the Shekinah glory, which is the visible manifestation of God's presence, is to come in the Messianic or the millennial kingdom. In the millennial kingdom, there will be 5 simultaneous visible manifestations of God's presence. Shekinah glory will be visible in 5 different ways, all at the same time. First of all, Ezekiel tells us in Ezekiel 43, 1 to 5 and Ezekiel 44, 1 to 3 that the Shekinah glory will be in the Holy of Holies of the millennial temple, as it was in the Solomonic temple, so the Shekinah glory will be visible in the millennial temple. Second, we're told that the Shekinah glory will be on a wall around Jerusalem. Zechariah 2:5 tells us that. It's actually a wall of fire around Jerusalem. Third manifestation of God's visible presence is described it was described in Isaiah 4:5 to 6. And these verses state that the Shekinah glory will be over the millennial Mount Zion. We've seen 3 so far. The 4th manifestation of God's presence is seen here in Isaiah 60. And according to this chapter, the Shekinah glory will be over all the land of Israel. And then back in Isaiah 11:10, it describes the 5th manifestation of the Shekinah glory. And this one is in the person of Messiah himself, because the Messiah himself will be visible. He'll be the visible manifestation of God's presence in the Messianic kingdom. Therefore, the Shekinah glory will also be evident in the Messianic person. So we see all at the same time, we see the Shekinah glory in all these various areas, simultaneously, at the same time. Now, in verse 1, there we go. Arise, shine, for your light is come, and the glory of Jehovah is risen upon you. Israel is to arise, for the announcement is made that the Shekinah light is coming. Jehovah's glory is risen upon his people. And this proclamation of the Shekinah's arrival answers a promise that was made in Isaiah 58, verse 8. Isaiah 58:8 says, Then shall your light break forth as the morning, and your healing shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of Jehovah shall be your rearward, not reward, rearward. Therefore, the promise was that if Israel would truly repent and turn again to God, then the Shekinah glory would return to Israel. Going back into the last chapter 59:9, here it is again. Therefore is justice far from us, neither doth righteousness overtake us. We look for light, but behold darkness, for brightness, but we walk in obscurity. Now, chapter 58, Israel was told of the problem. In chapter 59, Israel admits the problem and solves the problem. In 60 verse 1, the promise is fulfilled and the Shekinah glory now returns. Arise and shine. Here we go. In verse 2, the light comes when the darkness has reached its greatest point of blackness. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the peoples. But Jehovah will arise upon you, and his glory shall be seen upon you. Hebrew term for darkness here is shashek, phonetically. It's used in Joel chapter 2, verse 2 to describe the tribulation. Hebrew term for gross darkness, Araphel, is also used by Joel in the same verse, and again it describes the tribulation. So these terms that we're looking at here in verse 2 show that the tribulation will be characterized by heavy darkness. But this period of blackness will suddenly end for the Jewish people with the coming of the Shekinah light. And when darkness has reached its greatest point and Israel is threatened with total obliteration, Jehovah will rise upon his people and his glory shall be seen upon Israel. And the reason is that at this point, Messiah will return and destroy Israel's enemies. As a result of the coming of the Shekinah glory upon all Israel, in verse 3, Israel will become the center of Gentile attention, and nations, as Gentiles, shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Now, having introduced the concept of Gentiles becoming attracted to Israel and becoming the center of Gentile attention, Isaiah now elaborates upon this attraction of the Gentiles in verses 4 to 9. Why are they coming? Well, here we go. The elaboration of the attraction of the Gentiles we see in 4 to 9. We're told several things concerning the activities of the Gentiles in the Messianic kingdom. First, in verse 4, the Gentiles will aid with the regathering of the Jews. Lift up your eyes round about and see. They all gather themselves together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from far, and your daughters shall be carried in the arms. So the Gentile nations will help bring the Jewish people back to Israel. And second, we see in verse 5, the wealth of the nations will also be brought to Israel. Then you shall see and be radiant, and your heart shall thrill and be enlarged. Why? Because the abundance of the sea shall be turned unto you. The wealth of the nations shall come up unto you. So the wealth of the nations and the abundance of the sea will be brought to Israel. The Jewish people will see it and they'll be filled with joy. And in verses 6 to 9, he now tells us some of these nations. Several nations are mentioned, including nations which had previously been enemies with Israel. Verse 6 lists Midian, Ephah, and Sheba. The multitude of camels shall cover you, the dromedaries of Midian and Ephah. All they from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense and shall proclaim the praises of Jehovah. All three locations are mentioned in this verse are referred to in Genesis 25, 1 to 4. I'll just read a couple of verses for you here. And Abraham took, this is Genesis 25, 1 to 4. And Abraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bare him Zimram and Jokshan and Medan and Midian and Ishbak and Shua. And Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim and Letushim and Lumin. And the sons of Midian, Ephah and Epher and Hanok and Abida and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah. What is this saying? This passage shows us that Midian, the nation Midian, Ephah and Sheba were related to each other through Abram and his wife Keturah. While the location of the tribe of Midian is known, the exact locations of Ephah and Sheba are not quite so certain. They're uncertain. Now, according to the Zondervan Atlas of the Bible, the nomadic tribe of Midian had its center in northwest Arabia, east of the Gulf of Aqaba, but at times it entered the Jezreel Valley as well, because that's the story of Gibeon. Also in the Transjordan area, and maybe even into the Negev and North Sinai. It's just a little bit of geography for you there. Now, Ephah is mentioned in verse 6 as a transporter of gold and frankincense from Sheba. Sheba was possibly in southwest Arabian Peninsula in the vicinity of modern-day Yemen, down there somewhere, although some suggest it's the Horn of Africa. near modern Djibouti. Mode of transportation of all three tribes, camels and dromedaries. So during the Messianic kingdom, tribes will transport items of wealth with the help of these animals to Israel in praise of Jehovah. Rabbinic interpretation sees the gold and frankincense mentioned in this verse as being gifts for the Messiah. David Kimchi, he's a rabbi, commentating rabbi. He wrote, gold and frankincense they shall carry for trade as well as for gifts for the King Messiah and temple. Verse 7 also lists Kedar and Nabath. All the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered together unto you. The rams of Nabath shall minister unto you. They shall come up with acceptance on mine altar, and I will glorify the house of my glory. Now, both Kedar and Nabath were sons of Ishmael. Genesis 25:13. The Arabian tribe of Kedar settled to the south and southeast of Israel. Nabath are now known as the Nabateans. Genesis 28:9 and 1 Chronicles 1:29. It's an Arab tribe that first appeared in the 6th century BC in the desert located to the east of the Jordan River and came from the southeast of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, they were the ones who settled first in Bosra. You know, Petra, a beautiful carved out of the rock city. All right. So now, they were the ones who first settled in Bosra and expanded their territory to the Haran and the Levant and finally announced Bosra as their capital. Geography and history, all right? Today, this city is also known by the name Petra. Petra was the capital of Nabatean kingdom for most of its history until the Roman Emperor Trajan created the province of Arabia in AD 106 and annexed the Nabatean kingdom. Okay, Bosra and Petra will play a significant role when we get to Isaiah 63. But here in verse 8, there's a rather strange verse thrown in. In the place of a direct statement, it's a question. It's as if Isaiah saw something that he could not fully comprehend because he asked a question. He says, who are these that fly as a cloud and as the doves to their windows? What is he seeing in his vision? Lots of guessing games as to the meaning of verse 8. Among the more enlightened ones who like to see prophecy fulfilled on a daily basis are that these are 747 airplanes, or it could be A380 airplanes. That might be true because Isaiah's asking a question. He's not giving a statement. He says, who are these that fly as a cloud? There's something in the sky moving. What is it? He's seeing something that he could not comprehend or explain. He doesn't have the vocabulary to properly describe what he saw in the vision. Could have been a helicopter. I don't know. We don't know. So whether or not these are planes, we don't know. Perhaps they're planes, and these planes were used to help the Jews regather in Israel. Don't know. Nevertheless, he does say something about coming by means of air because according to Matthew 24:31, angels as well as Gentile nations will participate in this regathering. Be they airplanes or angels, whatever Isaiah saw, they'll be used to regather the Jewish people by means of the air. Finally, in verse 9, the next thing he mentions is the ships of Tarshish. Well, surely the isles shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish first, to bring your sons from far, their silver and their gold with them, for the name of Jehovah your God, and for the Holy One of Israel, because he has glorified you. Now, Tarshish was a name given to many colonies settled by the Phoenicians. There was more than one Tarshish, but they were all begun by the Phoenicians, all right? The Phoenicians were seafarers. The colonies of Phoenicia, which included North Africa, Spain, England, and the coast of Africa, will all be involved in the regathering. They'll bring their wealth. What they do, they will do because they recognize that God has glorified Israel, and they want to be part of this. And now we see the subservience of the Gentiles in verses 10 to 14. Isaiah elaborates upon two statements Jehovah made earlier. First statement was found right back in Isaiah 45:14. Isaiah 45:14, let me read it for you. Thus says Jehovah, the labor of Egypt and the merchandise of Ethiopia and the Sabaeans, men of stature, shall come over unto you, and they shall be yours. They shall go after you. In chains they shall come over, and they shall fall down unto you. They shall make supplication unto you, saying, surely God is in you, and there is none else. There is no God except the God that's in you, Israel. And second statement is in Isaiah 49, verse 23. Isaiah 49, 23. 4 more chapters after. Here we go. Isaiah 49, 23. And kings shall be your nursing fathers. Whoops. And their queens your nursing mothers. They shall bow down to you with their faces to the earth and lick the dust off your feet, and you shall know that I am Jehovah. And they that wait for me shall not be put to shame. Now, in these two statements, which is Isaiah 45 and Isaiah 49, Jehovah declared that the Gentile nations would become subservient to the Jewish people. And these are now elaborated upon in verses 10 to 14. In the first part of verse 10, he begins to tell us that Jerusalem will be rebuilt in the kingdom by means of Gentile aid. It says, foreigners shall build up your walls, and their kings shall minister unto you. Not only will Gentiles aid in the regathering of Israel, but they'll also aid in the rebuilding of the land in general and the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the city in particular. In the kingdom, there'll be a united Gentile appeal for the building up of the new Jewish state. And the reason is in the second part of verse 10. For in my wrath I smote you, but in my favor have I had mercy on you. Whereas in God's wrath, God smote Israel, and he smote them severely, still smiting them. In his favor, he will have mercy that will far overshadow his smiting of Israel. And that day is coming. In verse 11, he says that the gates of Jerusalem will remain continually open, so the wealth of the nations can be brought in. He says, your gates also shall be open continually. They shall not be shut day nor night, that men may bring unto you the wealth of the nations and their kings led captive. So Gentile nations from all over the world will make pilgrimages to Jerusalem and give their offerings to the city. Now the phrase, it could be different in your Bible, and the phrase here, and their kings led captive, it's better translated as, and their kings led in procession. That's the New American Standard Version. The idea being that the kings will be brought in a triumphal procession to the city of Jerusalem as the captives of her God, Jehovah, God of Israel. Now, according to Zechariah 14, 16 to 19, Zechariah 14, 16 to 19, these Gentile processions will occur annually during Sukkot. Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles. Remember, that's one of the feasts they must attend. Every year, Gentile nations must send representatives to that. In verse 12, this will be mandatory upon all Gentile nations. For that nation and kingdom that will not serve you shall perish. Yes, those nations shall be utterly wasted. So anyone who refuses to submit to Israel will be punished. And the punishment he mentions includes desolation. Now, in Zechariah 14, 16 to 19, punishment also includes drought or the withholding of rain. In the end, any nation that rebels against the mandate to be subservient to Israel will perish. So far, Gentiles will aid in the regathering of Israel, verse 9. Gentiles will also aid in the rebuilding of Jerusalem, verse 10. Gentiles will also aid in the building of the millennial temple, verse 13, first part. The glory of Lebanon shall come unto you, the fir tree, the pine, and the box tree together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary. So the millennial temple will be rebuilt with Gentile wealth. As in the first and second temples, the fourth temple will use the cedars of Lebanon, and other trees will be used as well. You know, see there where it says the glory of Lebanon? That's an idiomatic expression for the Jewish temple. It was used that way in Isaiah, back in Isaiah chapter 35, verse 2. Isaiah 35, 2. It's also used that way in Zechariah 11, verses 1 to 3. Now, as a result of Jerusalem being rebuilt, the city will become glorious. Second part of verse 13, and I will make the place of my feet glorious. Now, the one who deals with the results of the rebuilding of Jerusalem is Ezekiel, in Ezekiel chapter 43, verses 1 to 7. Ezekiel 43, 1 to 7. And the results of the rebuilding of the temple and the return of the Shekinah glory, Ezekiel says that God will make this place of his foot something glorious. And in verse 14, the descendants of anti-Semites will become subservient to Israel, and the sons of them that afflicted you shall come bending unto you, and all they that despised you shall bow themselves down at the soles of your feet, and they shall call you the city of Jehovah, the Zion of the Holy One of Israel. Just thinking of some politicians that we had, they could get bowing down before the Jews. Whoa, the offspring of those who afflicted and despised Jerusalem will recognize that it is not their capitals, but the capital of Israel that is the city of Jehovah. Jerusalem shall be called the city of Jehovah, the Zion of the Holy One of Israel. Verses 15 to 22, we see the exaltation of Jerusalem. So now he's introduced the concept of Jerusalem's glorious future. Isaiah further elaborated on the city's exaltation in 15 to 22. In verse 15, the emphasis here is upon the changed condition. It's a changed city. Whereas you have been forsaken and hated, so that no man pass through you, I will make you an eternal excellency, a joy of many generations. So, several facts concerning Jerusalem. First, once the city was forsaken and hated, but now in the Messianic kingdom, it will be majestic forever, and it's going to be a joy from age to age to be in Jerusalem. Second, in verse 16, nations and kings will bestow their vital energy upon Israel. This is verse 16. You shall also suck the milk of the nations, and shall suck the breast of the kings, and you shall know that I, Jehovah, am your Saviour, and your Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob. Strengthened by the Gentile nations, they will know who their God is. The God of Israel is the Saviour, the Redeemer, and he is the mighty one of Jacob, who will cause all of this to come to pass. And then, third thing we see in verse 17, it reveals several modes of beautification of Jerusalem. For brass, I'm going to bring gold, and for iron, I'll bring silver, and for wood, brass, and for stones, iron. I will also make your officers peace and your exactors righteousness. The city will be beautified with precious metals. And the fourth thing we see is that her leaders will now provide peace and righteousness. Fifth, see the renewal of the city and her leadership will go hand in hand with the end of violence and destruction. Verse 18, violence shall no more be heard in your land, desolation nor destruction within your borders. But you shall call your walls salvation and your gates praise. Her walls are walls of salvation and her gates are gates of praise. Beautiful. Sixth thing we see is that Israel will no longer need the light of the sun. Why? Because the Shekinah glory will illuminate the Messianic kingdom. Verses 19 to 20. The sun shall be no more your light by day, neither for brightness shall the moon give light unto you. But Jehovah will be unto you an everlasting light, and your God your glory. Your sun shall no more go down, neither shall your moon withdraw itself. For Jehovah will be your everlasting light, and the days of your mourning shall be ended. The Shekinah glory, as we said earlier on, will be over the entire land of Israel, as well as around Jerusalem and over Mount Zion. The Shekinah glory will provide light for Israel in the kingdom. And this passage shows that Jehovah himself will be Israel's everlasting light and the God of her glory. Therefore, the light of the sun will not be needed anymore, and the time of Israel's mourning will finally end. This is also seen in Revelation 21:23, Revelation 21:23, and Revelation 22:25. And that's the eternal order. That's the eternal order. That's in Revelation, that is. Okay. I got a text message here. It looks like somebody just got saved. Seventh, status of Israel is brought out in verses 21 and 22. Beginning in verse 21 with a declaration of righteousness. Your people also shall be all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. So the entire land or nation will be righteous. The entire land will be righteous. Because the nation is righteous, they will possess the land forever and God will be glorified. Now, little rabbinical concept here. Rabbinical concept of all Israel having a share in the world to come originates from verse 21 here. And this is the verse that is used. Your people also shall be all righteous. And because of the concept that all Israel is all righteous, the rabbis taught from this verse that all Israel of all time will have a share in the world to come. What they're ignoring though is that the all Israel is dealing with all Israel living at that time. Because Isaiah applied the righteousness of all Jewish people to the generation that comes to faith in preparation for the Messianic kingdom, the ones who repented and called for his return. But the rabbis applied the concept to all Israel of all generations. What they're ignoring is that the phrase, your people shall be righteous. And that refers to all Israel living at that time. It doesn't guarantee that all Jews who have ever lived will enter the Messianic kingdom. And that is what they believe. Having declared now the righteousness of all Israel, Isaiah next noted in verse 22 that the nation will also be great in number. He says, the little one shall become 1,000, and the small one a strong nation. I, Jehovah, will hasten it in its time. So the growth of the nation will be such that the least one shall become a clan, and the smallest one a mighty nation. And this will become reality when Jehovah himself accomplishes it quickly. Rabbis have an explanation here as well and say, how can the Messiah have been so long in coming when Isaiah says that God will hasten it in its time? And in addition here, the rabbi's answer is, if Israel is righteous, God will hasten its coming. However, if Israel is not righteous, Jehovah will not hasten the coming of the Messiah. So there's an admission there that Israel has not been very righteous. And somehow the rabbis do not see the contradiction in between verses 21 and 22. In verse 21, they say all Israel will be righteous. Not so. Branch in verse 21 refers to Israel, not the Messiah. Just by the by, it says, I think it's a branch. Yeah. Previous verse. Okay, moving on. Now, 4 types of messianic prophecies. Well, we're getting lots of stuff. 4 types of messianic prophecies are found. This is in the Old Testament. First of all, the type that deals with the first coming only. Example of that is Isaiah 7:14. All right, first coming. Second, the type that deals with the second coming only. Example, Isaiah 63:1-6. When we get there, we'll see it. 63:1-6. Third is a type that combines the first and second coming into one picture without indicating in the text itself any gap of time in between the 2 comings. Examples include Isaiah 61:1-3 and Zechariah 9:9-10. And then the 4th type, it spells out the whole redemptive career. And this type views the first coming, then a gap of time, and then the second coming, followed by the kingdom. And examples of this include Psalm 110. Okay, moving on. Here we come now to the servant of Jehovah, 61:1-11. Now we see first coming in verses 1 and first part of verse 2. In Isaiah 61:1-11 is the last passage in the book that speaks of the servant of Jehovah. The chapter will be discussed in 4 parts. In these verses, the first coming of Messiah is described. In these verses 1-3 is the 3rd category of messianic prophecies. Verses 1-2, first part of 2, deal with the first coming only, together with second part of verse 2 to 3. It combines the first and second coming into one picture without indicating in the text itself that the events are separated by a gap of time. While verses 1 to the first part of 2 only deal with Messiah's first coming, second part of verse 2 and verse 3 cover his second coming. So the first and second comings are blended into one picture. Verse 1, the Spirit of the Lord Jehovah is upon me. And with that expression, notice all three members of the Trinity are present in this statement. All three. Hebrew term for Spirit is Ruach and refers to God the Holy Spirit. Hebrew term for Lord Jehovah is Adonai Jehovah and refers to God the Father. The pronoun me refers to the servant, God the Son. So here in these verses, Isaiah combines statements he made earlier in the book. So this is a bit of a compound of chapter 11 verse 2, chapter 11 verse 2, chapter 42 1, 42 1, 49 8, 49 8, and 50 verse 4 to 5. 50 verse 4 to 5. So thoughts in all of those segments are united into this one segment here. By combining information from all these four segments, this verse reveals that the Spirit of Jehovah would be upon the servant at his first coming. Then the second part of verse 1 and the first part of verse 2 provide 5 reasons for the anointing of the servant. Second part of verse 1. Because Jehovah has anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound. First part of verse 2. To proclaim the year of Jehovah's favor. Okay, now, Hebrew root for anointed is mashak and could be rendered as messiahed. Okay, so the servant was messiahed to do certain things. First, to preach good tidings unto the meek or the poor. Hebrew word for good tidings or here is the same Hebrew word that corresponds to the Greek word for gospel, good news or good tidings. Now, we covered this in Isaiah 40 verse 9 quite a while ago. Messiah was anointed so that he could preach the good news, the gospel, to his people. Therefore, that is the first reason he was Messiah or anointed, to proclaim the gospel, and second reason he was anointed, to bind up the brokenhearted. Now, those who are brokenhearted suffer the inward results of sin, and Messiah's first coming would deal with this inward sin issue. Third, the servant was anointed to proclaim liberty to the captives. The captivity was that of sin. This is an outward manifestation that he will deal with at his first coming also. The words Isaiah used here are the words that describe the sabbatical year when the Jewish slaves were to be set free. This expression is used of the sabbatical year in Leviticus 25, verses 8 to 55, and also in Deuteronomy 15, verses 1 to 18. Deuteronomy 15, 1 to 18. Now, while Jewish slaves were to be set free on the sabbatical year, this was one of the points under the Mosaic law that Israel was found to be in disobedience to. In Jeremiah 34, 8 to 11, one of Israel's sins was the failure to release the Jewish slaves in the sabbatical year. Again, they were rebelling against Mosaic law, against God. Disobedience to the Mosaic law caused the Jews to become enslaved to sin. And the Messiah was now anointed for the reason of proclaiming liberty to these captives. Fourth thing you see here is that he was also Messiah or anointed to open the prison to them that are bound, thereby releasing the prisoners from their enslavement to sin, the world, and the devil. Here's the 4 reasons. Fifth reason now, he was anointed for the purpose of proclaiming the year of Jehovah's favor. The word proclaims means to announce beforehand. It means to announce something that has not yet started, but it will begin. So in this verse, he proclaimed or announced beforehand the year of Jehovah's favor before it even began. The expression year of Jehovah's favor is also taken from the concept of the Mosaic law and refers to the year of Jubilee. Again, year of Jubilee, we see that there in Leviticus 25, 8-38. Now, in the New Testament setting, the year of Jehovah's favor is the dispensation of grace. So, the announcing beforehand of the year of Jehovah's favor is the announcement of the coming of the dispensation of grace. It's the time of Jehovah's favor. And that announcement came with full force in Matthew 13, where Messiah introduced the outworking of the mystery kingdom in this age. Jesus, Yeshua, read Isaiah 61 verses 1 to the first part of verse 2 in the synagogue of Nazareth. This account is recorded in Luke 4:16-19, which I'm going to read for you right now. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and he entered, as his custom was, into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and stood up to read. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. And he opened the book and found the place where it was written, The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. That is as far as Jesus read in the scroll. He read all of verse 1 and the first line of verse 2, and then he stopped. And then, in verses 20-21 of Luke 4, he closed the book, he gave it back to the attendant, and he sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began to say unto them, Today has this scripture been fulfilled in your ears. What portion of Isaiah 61 was being fulfilled at that point? Not the whole segment, but only verse 1 and the first line of verse 2. From Jesus himself, we learn the proper interpretation of Isaiah 61 verses 1-3. Only verses 1 and the first part of 2 were fulfilled at his first coming. He just told us that. He was anointed to perform 5 specific things during this time, and as the Gospels showed, that is exactly what he did. He came to preach the gospel. He came to release those who believe in him from the captivity of sin. The rest of the prophecy of Isaiah 61, 1-3, which speaks about the restoration of Israel, will be fulfilled in conjunction with his second coming. Here we go, the second coming. We see in second part of verse 2 to verse 3. Here we go for time here. Okay, good. And the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn, to appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them a garland for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called trees of righteousness, the planting of Jehovah, that he may be glorified. Now, while at his first coming, this servant of Jehovah came to preach the gospel and to release from the captivity of sin, and thus bring in spiritual redemption. The purpose of his second coming is to bring a physical redemption. How? By restoring Israel. Therefore, he was further messiahed or anointed to perform, first, to proclaim the day of vengeance of our God. Verse 2a ended by stating that one of the reasons to anoint the servant was so that he could proclaim the year of Jehovah's favor, meaning the dispensation of grace. We just spoke about that. The day of vengeance now follows the year of Jehovah's favor, and that is going to be the Great Tribulation. Second, the servant was anointed to comfort all that mourn. This will occur at the second coming. Third, he was anointed to appoint the Messianic kingdom unto them that mourn in Zion. So there are things he was to accomplish in his first coming, which he did. he accomplished the 5 things mentioned earlier. In his second coming, he'll accomplish 3 more things. Altogether, he was Messiah or anointed to accomplish 8 things, 5 at his first coming and 3 at his second coming. In the future kingdom that the servant will appoint unto Zion, in this kingdom, Messiah will give Zion a garland. Did I just read this? No. Okay. A garland for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning. Now, this expression is used in the Messianic Psalm, Psalm 45, verse 7. You have love, I'll read it for you. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your fellows. And this is where the Messiah is anointed with the oil of gladness. Messiah will give a garment of praise in place of the spirit of heaviness, meaning he will replace Zion's drooping spirit with a garment of splendor. And the reason for it all is that Israel may be called the trees of righteousness, the planting of Jehovah, and that God may be glorified. So if you look back at Isaiah chapter 60, verse 21, where it states, your people also shall be all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands. Why? That I may be glorified. What we're told is that Israel's establishment in the kingdom and all that he said in chapter 60 will be accomplished by means of the servant of Jehovah, the Messiah, the Lord Jesus Christ. Isaiah 61, 1-3 tells us the means by which chapter 60 will find its fulfillment. It will be by means of the program of the Messiah in his first and second comings, and that he is going to accomplish everything stated in chapter 60. Now in verses 4-9, we see the restoration of Israel. Now, after telling us how it's all going to be accomplished, Isaiah now again deals with the theme of Israel's restoration. First, in verse 4, and they shall build the old wastes. They shall raise up the former desolations, and they shall repair the waste cities, the desolations of many generations. All the waste cities will be rebuilt, re-established, and re-inhabited. Second, in verse 5, the Gentiles will be the servants of the Jews, and strangers shall stand and feed your flocks, and foreigners shall be your plowmen and your vine dressers. The Gentiles will work in the fields of Israel, taking care of the flocks and growing food. This was elaborated upon in the previous chapter. Third, Israel will finally become the nation of priests. Verse 6. But you shall be named the priests of Jehovah. Men shall call you the ministers of our God. You shall eat the wealth of the nations, and in their glory shall you boast yourselves. Right back in Exodus 19, verses 5-6, Exodus 19, 5-6. God said that he called and redeemed Israel from Egypt. Why? So they could become a nation of priests to the Gentile world. Israel has totally failed in fulfilling her obligations. Nevertheless, success will come in the future when Israel will become a priestly nation, a nation of priests. Fourth thing we see in verse 6, second part, verse 6, she will receive the wealth of the nations, and this is the Gentiles. We saw that back in Isaiah 60, verse 13. Fifth, they shall receive double blessing following double punishment. Remember, she receives double for all her sins. Verses 7-8. Remember, in this segment, he's dealing with the third point of Isaiah 40, verse 2. Isaiah 42 says this, Israel has received of Jehovah's hand double for all her sins. The double punishment will give way to double blessing. Instead of your shame, you shall have double. And instead of dishonor, they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore, in their land they shall possess double. Everlasting joy shall be unto them. For I, Jehovah, love justice. I hate robbery with iniquity, and I will give them their recompense in truth, and I'll make an everlasting covenant with them. So what we see here is that shame is going to be replaced with double blessings, and dishonor will be replaced with a double portion of possessions in the land. Israel will have everlasting joy. The recompense of the tribulation will pass, And Jehovah will make a new and everlasting covenant with his people when all Israel will be saved. And the sixth thing we see in verse 9, Israel standing among the Gentiles. And their seed shall be known among the nations, and their offspring among the peoples. All that see them shall acknowledge them, that they are the seed which Jehovah has blessed. That is in the future. Israel will be known. The seed and offspring of Israel will be known by the Gentiles. The entire Gentile world will confess and acknowledge that the Jewish people are the seed that Jehovah has blessed. All amillennialists will have to acknowledge the fact that Israel is, after all, the seed of Jehovah. Now, verses 10 to 11, we see the righteousness of Israel. Chapter here, it's only a short chapter, ends in verse 10 to 11 with a description of Israel's righteousness. The speaker in this passage is the saved nation of Israel. In verse 10, she says, this is Israel talking, I will greatly rejoice in Jehovah. My soul shall be joyful in my God, for he has clothed me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom decks himself with a garland, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. In her righteousness, Israel will rejoice in Jehovah and have joy in her God, because he will clothe her with the garments of salvation and the robes of righteousness. Now, the simile he draws here is that of the bride and the bridegroom. The groom was to deck himself out with a garland. The word deck comes from the same Hebrew word kahan, K-A-H-A-N, which means to act as a priest. Kahan is also the root for the term Kohen, K-O-A-H-N, meaning priest. So the Hebrew word for garland here means to go over the bows. Over the bows, like coconut boughs, go over the bows. In the 7 verses where this noun appears, it mainly refers to a headdress or turban, right? This to deck himself with a garland, there with a garland. In Exodus 39:28, Exodus 39:28 and Ezekiel 44:18, the word describes a mitre, a mitre worn by priests. Therefore, the emphasis drawn from the simile of the bride and the groom is that Israel will become a nation of priests. While the groom will deck himself with a mitre, the bride will adorn herself with jewels. This was a Jewish wedding tradition until AD 70, when, as a result of the destruction of the temple, the rabbis outlawed the use of a mitre upon the groom and a crown upon the bride. However, Isaiah says here in verse 10 that this will one day be restored. And in verse 11, Israel as a saved nation will not only be righteous, but she'll also produce righteousness before the nations. Verse 11 says this, for as the earth brings forth its bud, and as the garden causes the things that are sown in it to spring forth, so the Lord Jehovah will cause righteousness and praise to spring forth before all the nations. Now, in the past, Israel's sinfulness caused God's name to be profaned among the nations. In the future, just as fields and gardens produce what they were designed to produce, you plant seeds, you get crops, so will Israel's righteousness produce righteousness and praise in the presence of all the nations. And that's where we're going to leave it for this session. Timed it well. Thank you for coming along. Study hard, grow strong.